in this side event. The side event is co-organized by Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, Non-Timber Forest Product Exchange Program, and Asian Farmers Association for Sustainable Rural Development. This consortium of NTFP-EP, ALPHA, and AIPP has been engaging in the World Forestry Congress for some time. And one of the objectives of our consortium is to really highlight the community speak agenda. What is community speak? Community speak is an advocacy agenda which weaves together the voices and experiences of a network of smallholders, community forest and farm producers and enterprises, indigenous peoples and local communities living in forest and forested landscape. So as part of the community speak agenda, our consortium has been engaging in several campaigns and also policy work. So I request all the participants of this meeting who are joining physically in Korea to collect our t-shirts and knowledge products, which showcases the community speak agenda that we have been doing in our region. And also as part of the building on the momentum that we have gained on the community speak agenda, today we have communities of indigenous peoples representing different countries. For example, we have indigenous peoples from Nepal, we have indigenous peoples from Thailand, Philippines, and Indonesia, who will be sharing their experiences, stories, and actions that they are taking on climate actions and biodiversity protection. Also, besides those actions at the local level and the initiatives and stories, we also have our representatives and our organizations engaging on climate and biodiversity advocacy process at local, national, and international process. So in this side event, you will also have an opportunity to get insights from those peoples who have been following those processes for some time, and then really present and insights in terms of the issues, concerns, and what do we need to do collectively as a consortium, and also the support that we need from government and civil society. So without further ado, we'd like to go straight into the sharing. And our flow of the side event would be in the first two side presentation will really focus into the regional and international analysis of indigenous people's engagement on the climate change processes. And then we'll look into, in the second part, really putting that human rights-based perspective into the discussion on biodiversity conservation. And then we'll end our sharing sessions with a very powerful stories of indigenous women leadership in Thailand and in the Philippines. So today, the first speaker is Pasang Dolma Sherpa. Pasang Dolma Sherpa is an executive director of the Center for Indigenous Peoples Research and Development, CIPRED in short. And she has been working with indigenous peoples, women, and local communities at local, national, and international levels for more than 2 decades. She is the first indigenous women co-chair of the facilitative working group of the local communities and indigenous peoples platform of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. She's also the chair of the specialist group on indigenous peoples' customary and environmental laws and human rights within the IUCN. Pasang, you have the floor and you have 10 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Lakpa. Tasdile, namaskar, and good morning, everyone. And thank you very much, the organizer AIPP and NTFE for this great opportunity to share my own experience working in the context of the climate change, environment, and as well as in relation to the issues and concerns of indigenous peoples at all levels. Can I? Okay, I see my presentation. Can you please move on, or maybe I can share?
Yes, Pasang, you can share.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Maybe it is easier. Okay, so like working in the area of the indigenous peoples and issues and concerns, especially in relation to the climate change. We all are aware the small amount of, the numbers of indigenous people, 6.2%, how it has been contributing to climate change resilience through the protection of the more than 80% of the biodiversity and ecosystem. And then the IPCC reports already talked about the importance of indigenous people's knowledge system for climate change resilience, as well as biodiversity conservation. So with all the outcome of the study, as well as our own ground level experience, already shows that indigenous people's role and contribution are really, really, really pertinent in the context of climate change, in the context of biodiversity and ecosystem. Another part, this just I want to share, like IPCC started, inviting indigenous people to hear our issues and concern. This is the pictures taken in Glasgow, that where I was invited as a indigenous, the scientists, especially on the social sectors that focus on the I pushed on that indigenous people are not just only presented as a contributor for the scientists or contributor for all this process, but also the real actor, and also inviting indigenous peoples, they as an equal footing as a scientist to deal with a holistic approach of solution to the climate change. So this is kind of, a slide I would like to share, that the first time, I think in the IPCC report, that emphasize on the recognition of the inherent rights of indigenous peoples as an integral part of the success for the forest adaptation in many years. So this refers that, how important it is to have recognition and promotion, protection of our customary institution, our governance system, our cultural values to deal with, for the global crisis, or, protection of our natural resources. However, the problem is none of the forest regimes or conservation or protected area that recognize our values, our inherent rights, especially recognition of our customary governance and ecosystem. And this is the question comes up, like a post-biodiversity framework, and come up with the 30 by 30 program, how it will be addressed. This is, I would like to share the outcome of the recent research of RRI, where I was also co-authors, that, the expansion, the possible expansion of 30-30 program is like a 23 almost %, and expansion almost, more than where the area, and then possible expansion of the area where indigenous people are living with the traditional governance and traditional livelihoods. So, what happened when it's projection of an expansion of the protected area without really considering the issues and concerns of indigenous people? And also with coming up with the solution that right-based solution is the only solution if you really want to have sustainable solution for the conservation. So, and also this is not only right-based solution is not only for protection of our knowledge system and cultural values and contribution for the climate change resilience and biodiversity, but the right-based solution is also the cheapest way of conservation in comparison to the investment by the state parties on the protection of the national park and conservation. You can see the figure here. So this is just the example that I would like to share in the context of Nepal, that, Shakya as a customary tradition, how it has contributed for climate change resilience, and, with the principles of 7 non-violence principles of not killing, not hunting, not trapping, or not firing. This is our part of our culture. So this is already been contributing climate change resilience, biodiversity conservation, and just only, acknowledging, recognizing promotion is a already solution for climate change resilience and conservation. Now I go back to the the global context. That global context already started craving for issues and concerns of indigenous people. Paris agreements, the basis foundation is also a big achievement for indigenous peoples. The 2 decades of struggle, especially for recognition of indigenous knowledge system, and with the mandate of strengthen the knowledge system, our own experiences, practices, and as a part of the best practices for the adaptation and mitigation and holistic integrated approach of solution. The facility working group, as you are already aware, that is already been effective since 3 years. Is moving ahead already with the 3 function of knowledge, capacity buildings, and the climate change policy. So at least this has been a forum for uplifting the knowledge of indigenous people and building the capacity not only of the indigenous people but also the state parties, so that we'll have indigenous friendly climate change policies and action, so that recognition of our inherent rights, as mentioned by IPCC, will be there. So this is just the composition. You can also see in the Google's, in the portal of the LCIP that from the 7 sociocultural regions, there are already 1 member is, and the composition of 14 members, 50% are from indigenous people from sociocultural regions, and 50 from the state parties. And this is the first time, bringing indigenous people on the same table at the state parties to deal with the issues and concerns, especially sharing our knowledge and our experiences, and to be reflected in the policies and the action. This is just another picture that where the members are coming from all around the world. And this is the historical picture, first time a facility working group, as Lakpa mentioned already, that I was the first co-chair, and coming along with the state parties and talking and dealing with our issues and concerns at the UNCCC forum. This is the recent picture of the FWG 6 meeting. We have already across the history of completion of 6 facility working group and the implementation of the 12 activities. And this is one of the activities, multi-stakeholder dialogue, bringing indigenous people, local communities, state parties on the same forum, while implementation of 12 activities to fulfill the 3 functions of the platform. This is also another historical picture that you can see, that first time in the history of the UNCCC inviting our indigenous, the knowledge holders, our elders all around the world to discuss and present and teach, and also share our values, how important it is to deal with the climate change with the state parties, and also the negotiators, and also the bilateral, multilateral agencies within and outside the UNCCC. This is also the dialogue. So you can already see the layers of activities within the UNCCC, within the FWG, within the UNCCC, dealing with different bodies on the issues and concerns, especially the recognition of indigenous peoples' knowledge system to be a part of the main decision of the COP. You can already see that the LC platform has been really a forum that has a space for indigenous peoples to share our knowledge and system, especially with all the collaborative and bilateral, multilateral agencies, as well as while implementing 2 years work plan already done. And now the COP26 has already come up with a 3 years work plan, and this is a space for recognition of indigenous people knowledge, cultural practices, and value system. This is my last presentation. So this is just a summary of the outcome of the COP26 in relation to LCIP. Now we have already the recognition of indigenous people, local communities in relation to the stewardship and living in harmony with nature. So when you talk about the conservation biodiversity ecosystem, we cannot be away without acknowledging, without meaningful engagement, without on the equal footing space of indigenous people representative in decision-making bodies, and continue working and contributing for the facility working group of implementation of the 3 functions. And now finally the 3 years work plan has already been approved, so it's going to start from June. So this is one of the section that contributing for the fulfillment and objectives of the Convention of the Paris Agreement. With this one, I would like to thank you very much, and I'm happy to respond if there is any queries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pasang, for that very comprehensive presentations. And it is good to see that, of course, I know that there has always been a structural challenge for indigenous peoples organizations as an observer to really intervene in the climate change policy. Now, it's good to get an update that there is an unprecedented space for indigenous peoples to actually have a dialogue with the government with an equal footing, no? In the same space, and also that there is already a work plan of the local communities and indigenous peoples platform, and also there has been activities ongoing between indigenous peoples and government. But also you have highlighted a very important point in terms of the need to elevate this, how to call that, the footing of indigenous knowledge equal to scientific knowledge. And it's good to see that the dialogue is ongoing between scientific communities, and also the report that you mentioned about the IPCC actually talks about the indigenous peoples' customary governance and institution, which is really the foundations for us to actually do continue our resource management. Thank you again, Pasang, for that very precise presentations. Now we will continue to share more on climate change engagement of indigenous peoples from Asia. Now the next sharing on that topic would be from Kitisak Ratana Krajansri. He is an indigenous person from northern Thailand and belongs to Lu Mien Indigenous Group. He is the current chairperson of Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, also the chairperson of Council of Indigenous Peoples in Thailand, and the executive director of Indigenous Peoples Foundation for Education and Environment. He has worked to promote and protect the rights of indigenous people since 1989, particularly on land and natural resource issues. He also has knowledge and experiences on several issues. These include database development and management for the most vulnerable indigenous group in Thailand, documentation of human rights violation, study and development of community climate change adaptations, and drafting a law and policy to protect and safeguard the rights of indigenous peoples. Kitisak, please go ahead with your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Lakpa, for introducing me, and also could like to say good morning to everyone here, and also those who join online. The topic that I'm going to share with you today is on the implementation of the the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Just back a little bit. Yeah. And I will talk at the regional overview of the Asia indigenous people, in particular on the how IP rights and knowledge taken into account and action on the ground. In particular, the NDCs or naturally determined contributions, and also LED plus. Next. Okay, this is just to give you an overview of the general information about indigenous people in Asia. As you may know, 2/3 of indigenous people, around 370 million, living in Asia. This enrich the region's enormous cultural and linguistic diversity. Indigenous people in Asia are called in different names. For example, ethnic minorities, new tribes, tribal people, highland people, aboriginal people, native people, and many others. Some of the terms, of course, are not appreciated by many indigenous people, because they imply notion of cultural inferiority, primitiveness, and also backwardness. Next. Okay, I will talk about the general status of the indigenous people in focus countries, which include India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Philippines. As you know, in these countries, all of them except Bangladesh support the adoption of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, or UNDRIP. In addition, they also adopted the key United Nations Human Rights Treaties. These are, for examples, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and also International Convention on the Elimination on all forms of racial discrimination and others. The implementation and the legal recognitions and also the implementation of the indigenous people's rights on the ground of these commitments and also obligations varies significantly between countries. For example, in the Philippines, they have the IPRA law or Indigenous People Rights Act. And in Indonesia, recently the Constitutional Court also affirmed the customary rights of indigenous people. And in Cambodia, the land law recognized the collective ownership of indigenous people. However, the forestry law, they are also not in favor of that yet. That's also contradiction. And in Nepal, of course, they also recognize the multi-ethnic or multilingual or multi-religious culture. And in Bangladesh, they also recognize only the culture. And in these countries, the AIPP also experience social, political, cultural, and economic discrimination and threat to their traditional land, forests, and waters. They also often face being criminalized for carrying out their traditional activities, for example, like shifting cultivations and or protecting their territories. Next. This just shows you the impact of climate change and also that impact to indigenous community. As you know, the main problem also coming from the unpredictable weather patterns that resulting in the increase of rainfall or longer and more frequent droughts. And also that's also caused the more floods, soil erosion, wildfires, landslides, destructive of arable lands, and sea level highs. This also, of course, indigenous communities, as you know, many indigenous communities also rely directly on the natural resources for their survival. The impact like lack of water, also damaging their farmlands and farm crops, and also the food collection practices. As you know, some of the plants are not growing in some season due to the climate change, and also that also impact to the community health, like waterborne diseases, and also disrupt the family relations because in some communities, when they cannot get a good products from the harvest, many young people also migrate to town and work in the city. And that also caused problem because many of them also could not continue learning and practicing their knowledge on that. And that also caused the problem about the knowledge transmission. Next. This one Pasang already mentioned, but just I quickly highlight on that one because as you know, the Paris Agreement, which was adopted in December 2015 and came into effect in November 2016. As you know, the indigenous people and their allies also tried to lobby hard to get the issue of human rights and indigenous people's rights into the convention. And there are a few of them that's also recognized by the Paris Agreement. For example, in the preamble paragraph, they're also talking about when the state take action to address the issue of climate change, choose, respect, promote, and consider the respective obligation on human rights and the rights of indigenous people and local communities. And and on COP21 decision 1CP21 paragraph 135 that Pasang already mentioned. They also recognize the traditional knowledge, technology, and practices and effort of indigenous people and local communities. And they also established the local community indigenous people platform, the one that you already heard from Pasang. And in Article 7, Paragraph 5 on adaptation, they're also highlighting on the role of traditional knowledge of indigenous people and also local knowledge system. I think these are the gain that indigenous people who try to lobby and get the language into the Paris Agreement. And as you know, in Paris Agreement, there are a number of activities that the government is supposed to implement on the ground. For example, on the nationally determined contributions, or NDC, and also the forest sector like LEAD+, and also the National Adaptation Plan. So these are the main activities that we think that is most relevant to indigenous people. That's why AIPP partnering with UNDP and Forest People Program also jointly conduct a study how rights, roles, and knowledge of indigenous people are addressed in national level of climate policies and plan. Next. This of course will be conducted in 10 countries I mentioned earlier. So from the study, we found that the NDC from the analysis of the NDCs from 10 countries, we found that indigenous peoples are often invisible as rights holder and knowledge holder and agents of positive change at the national climate policies. And most policy written in general language of fairness, inclusions, and equality without specific mention indigenous people. And there are also some good example also, like in Myanmar, the NDC, they refer to the local community and indigenous people knowledge sharing platform, or LCIPP. And in Philippines, in Indonesia, they also refer to indigenous people, but it's all about the being victim of climate change, and also their participation and implementation in climate change plan and processes. And the issue of traditional knowledge also acknowledged as a valuable mitigation and adaptation effort. And NDC of the Philippines and Indonesia also refer broadly on human rights obligation, including rights of indigenous people. In Cambodia, explicitly states governments aim to promote land rights. And in Nepal, NDC, they also ensure that free, prior, or informed consent, or AIPP, should be part of its implementation of social safeguards. And on LEAD+ policy and activities from the review of the study from 10 countries. Of course, many of them also talking about indigenous peoples and indigenous people rights issues. And that because they also have to follow the requirements of the Cancun safeguards, that also referring to the rights of indigenous people. And they also follow some of the donors guidelines like UN RED and all the FCPF guidelines. And of course, when talking about the LEAD+ policy and plan, of course, is quite well capture the issue of the indigenous people's rights. Next. However, there are also some issue and concern of indigenous people about the national policies. From the study, we also found that the climate change policy exclusively failed to address the land tenure security caused by the lack of legal recognitions of customary land rights and threat to the traditional livelihoods faced by indigenous peoples. And in several instances, the policy even contribute to the criminalization of traditional sustainable practices by defining them as driver of deforestation. For example, like in Thailand, initially they also define shifting cultivation as main driver of deforestation, but later that they removed that from the list. Yeah, and the last one is the lack of broad and effective participation of indigenous people, like women, youth, and also people with disability. Next. Yeah, I just like to end with this one. Yeah, like Pasang already mentioned that even though the indigenous people also facing the impact of climate change, they do contribute to the climate change mitigation and adaptation. Of course, they have the role to play in protecting forests and biodiversity using their customary rules and practices, and also maintaining their knowledge and wisdom on how to adapt to harsh climatic conditions, and also providing example of food system resilience. Just to give an example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, many communities, they don't have any problem, because they still have resource available, surrounding them, so they can survive even a year, or beyond that without any problem. So that's kind of example of the roles and contribution of indigenous people on the adaptation. Okay, I think that's all for my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Pikitisak, for that very good overview of the indigenous peoples in Asia, but then also really highlighting the findings that has come out with that research done in 10 countries, and really showcasing like how the national climate action plans and policies are, whether very friendly to indigenous peoples or whether they are issues and concerns. And I think this kind of analysis will be very useful for our policy work, not only to engage with the international, but then really strengthening our policy work at the national level, and also to connect to the discussion that Pasang was sharing. I think these publications would also be very useful to the work plan, the implementation of the work plan that the local communities and indigenous peoples platform facilitative working group members are planning for the next 3 years. Thank you again, Pikitisak. Now, like I said earlier, now we will shift our discussions from the climate to the conservation of biodiversity, and to have that insights in terms of why human rights-based approach is essential in the discussion and conservation of biodiversity. We have 2 speakers to talk on that topic. We have Giovanni and we have Davy jointly presenting on the topic. Mr. Giovanni is a Sagada-born Kankanai indigenous person and is the president of the Philippines ICCA Consortium. Mr. Giovanni is also a member of the Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group, AIPP in short, of the Global Environment Facility. He holds a master's degree from the School of Urban and Regional Planning and a bachelor degree in Development Studies from the University of the Philippines. Davy Sutejo is a Vice National Coordinator of Jaringan Kerja Pemetaan, which is JKPP, or Indigenous Community Mapping Network. She's also an active member of the Regional Council of ICCA from Southeast Asia. Devi has been working with indigenous peoples and local communities on community mapping, participatory research, and participatory land use planning since 2013. She holds a master's degree from the AIPP University in Fisheries and Marine, Coastal and Marine Resources Management. So Giovanni and Devi, please go ahead with your joint presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Lakpa. Good morning, everyone. Selamat pagi. I acknowledge Indonesian friend. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yes, I will have a joint presentation with Pak Giovanni, my friend from Philippines, and I will be the first, Pak Giovanni. I will not take your time, but I will do first. Yeah. I would like to present our ICCA consortium concern about the resilient pathways. We are concerned about, wait a minute. About the how to scaling up human right-based approach in post-2020 global biodiversity framework. I would like to highlight the important target. It's called a spatial target, is because we highlight them because it's like important target for us, because this is will impact even worse or better for the indigenous people and local communities. We call the spatial target. It says that at least 30% of the world land and water under formal protection by 2030. It could be a formal protected area, or it called OECM. So it's like a very critical momentum for us, because it's got like a half world. Yeah, I would like to show in 2 slides. The first slide, I would show about the strong data. Actually, I took from the, there's a first one, data is about the primary forest loss, because we know the main problem is about the deforestation, right? So the first data is about the primary forest loss between 2020. So from the 22 to 2020, Southeast Asia lost like 14 million hectare of the primary forest. And Indonesia, my country, has the largest primary forest loss in Southeast Asia. And then the second is Malaysia with 9.75 million hectare. And the second data is so about the tree cover loss from 21 until 2020. From 21 to 2020, South Asia has lost like more than 15 million hectare of the tree cover. And Indonesia has the largest tree cover loss in Southeast Asia. It's like 27.7 million hectare. Next slide, please. And the second slide, I would like to show the conflict data. I took it from the, yes. I took data from tanahkita.id. This is, you can also visit the tanahkita.id portal, because it's for Indonesian spatial data. We took all in this portal. You can see the conflict data, and the second is community management area data. Yeah, from this portal tanahkita.id, it records like 157 conflict. It around 1.3 million hectare area of conflict. You can see this is in the conservation forest. It like the total conflict is 44, and then 34 conflict in protected forest, and 79 conflict in a production forest. 40 incident of agrarian conflict in conservation forest sector. Actually 29 conflict occurred in customary area, and it's the highest in national park in Indonesia. You know, in Indonesian national park is the highest conservation, so it's not no take zone. It's, you can come to the forest. Next slide, please. Yeah, actually the previous presenter Pak Pasang, Ibu Pasang and Pak Kitisak also share the data. I would like just to highlight a little bit more. Yeah, we know the Asia is home to an estimate like more than 400 million of indigenous people and many hundred of million of local communities, but only 8.7% actually the traditional territories are legally recognized. So it's very small portion. And then 30% of indigenous area are overlapped with protected area. Actually, this data also shared by Ibu Pasang before. Yeah, over 50% of conflict in lower middle income countries are due to the conservation. Next slide, please. I would like to show this kind. This is a very powerful picture. The right picture is I took, it's a new 2021. This is the Bangkok, we call Bangkok forest under the in Banten province, Pasir Eri indigenous people. So they take care their forest very with a good way. And then the second, this is also new picture 2020. Yeah, it's actually under Kinipan indigenous people in Central Kalimantan, but have been destroyed by the oil palm company called SML, Sawit Mandiri Lestari Company. So it's like of 3,700. And the 17% is actually the primary forest have been destroyed by this oil palm company. And in August 2020, actually the Pak Buhing is the IP's leader of the Kinipan, was criminalized and jailed by the police in 2020. So this is the picture. I would like to show about the contradictive. We know the better who take care better and who make the deforestation, right? Next, please. Yeah, this is what we have done that ongoing with the ICCA consortium. First, there is a 3-man of focus. First, we do the documentation, we do the community mapping, the document the land use of the indigenous and local communities. We also in like Philippines, we made the 3G map. And then the second is sustain livelihood, how to protect indigenous people and local community natural resource management and food system, how to formalize the food cooperation. And then the last we call defender, yeah, environmental protection, how IPs in the front line of defense of the forest and ensure the protection for environmental defenders, full and effective participation of IP youth, women and girls. Actually in this focus we have to we get the solidarity from many countries to support the defenders. Next. Yeah, I would like to show the distribution of map of ICCA in the Southeast Asia. Actually, we have some several countries, like in Indonesia. I will start to Indonesia. We have already like have 104 spot of the ICCA that have been registered by working group ICCA in Indonesia. And with total like 460,000 hectares that are already registered by the WGII. And then we also identified with 2.9 million hectares of potential ICCA to be registered and to be verified in Indonesia context. But only from the 104 spot, only like 25 ICCA are legally recognized by the government, which it's still a small portion, right? And then in Philippines, it's more than 300,000 hectares with 22 spot ICCA that have been documented. And also in Malaysia, we still have like 12 spot, and then Myanmar 5 spot of ICCA, and Vietnam actually even there is a spot in there. Actually, they're working for 40 spot of the ICCA, but still ongoing process. Next, please. Next slide. This is the last slide. I will brief. So this is the Indonesian map. Actually, JKPP, my organization with the working group ICC and the other networks, already work closely with indigenous people and local community. There is a 22 million hectares that have been mapped by the indigenous people and local communities. And like 17 million is actually under the IP's territory. 17. The rest is a local community. I would like to show actually from that total amount is more than 19% is overlap with the forest, and only like 2 million to 0.5 million is already recognized by the government from the total 17 million. So it's still small portion of the recognition. There is a lack recognition by the government to the indigenous people and local communities area. So we still have like long work and homework with the working group ICCA to ensuring the documentation. Yes, that's all. The next, I think this Pak Giovanni. The floor is yours, Pak Giovanni.
Can you put them up on the, or do I press it here? Yeah. So to continue with my colleagues' discussion, in terms of mapping, indigenous peoples may have no paper titles, but we have time immemorial native title. Knowledge of the terrain, boundaries, plant and animal species, are shaped by many generations of interaction with nature, and that is embedded in our native title. This knowledge and native title is then translated into its physical dimension in the form of a map. So you can see here how our knowledge is transformed into its physical dimension. And these maps are then used by indigenous communities to strengthen their positions against any other land uses other than forestry. And on the right side, you see there the inventory of resources where participants from the communities, their knowledge are merged with the scientific method of plotting, blocking, and transecting. This is a very systematic means of identifying tree and animal species so that we are able to determine the state of health of forest in that area. So there is a need to strengthen the knowledge of indigenous peoples and the knowledge of science. These may be clashing values, but when we merge them, then you can be sure that the IP rights-based approach is being applied. Next, please. There we mentioned a while ago about 300,000 hectares of ICCA's map in the Philippines. This is the second project that we mapped from 2016 to 2019 involving 10 ICCA sites. And in the because this is a GEF funded project, which was supposed to expand protected areas, we intervened. And we said that if you want to expand protected areas, then you have to enjoin the participation of indigenous communities, because the majority of forests in the Philippines are located in indigenous territories. So these 10 sites was decided by indigenous communities as decision makers, and government and NGOs were providing the technical and the logistical support. When we had the findings of our mapping analyzed by the Washington-based World Resource Institute, it found out that these 10 sites are able to hold at least 10.5 million tons of carbon. And that is just a segment of our ancestral territory. 158,000 hectares of ICCAs, or indigenous community conserved areas, able to hold 10.5 million tons of carbon, or that is equivalent to the gas emissions of 7 million cars annually. That is the contribution of indigenous communities who are in the margins, who are not being talked about, who are out in the cold, who are not members of any policymaking bodies, for example. So this is complementary. The outcome of our work was complementary to the findings of the Resource Institute, which found that 24% of indigenous lands and forests are able to hold 54 billion metric tons of carbon, or equivalent to 250 times higher than the emissions of the airline industry in 2015. That, again, is the invisible contribution of indigenous peoples in climate change mitigation. And so next slide, that's the data. The next slide will show you the data that each site is able to hold in terms of carbon sequestrations. And so we would like to conclude in our presentation that next slide. No future for the world's forests without their custodian indigenous peoples standing. Indigenous peoples' contribution in conserving 80% of the world's biodiversity areas is unparalleled. Ensuring the rights of IPs to scale up or mainstream forestry will prevent the destruction of forests, and this makes the indigenous peoples in the front lines of defense. Support for IPs means support for forests. Disrespect for their rights, do it at your own peril. Indigenous people's kinship with nature is to be passed from one generation to the next in a cycle like life itself. To cut this cycle means death of forests and forest custodians. This will result into massive climate change refugees around the world. So, recognize indigenous people's rights or not, do it at your own peril. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giovanni and Devi, for giving that very good overview of the work of ICCA Consortium, and also really presenting that specific data. Data is very powerful actually to support the policy work that we do. I think the one point that came out very clearly from both joint presentation is indigenous peoples have solutions to climate crisis and biodiversity crisis, and to enable indigenous peoples to really continue that the practices that they have done. Rights recognitions is very, very important, particularly the rights to land, territories, and resources. Thank you again to Devi and Giovanni for that very good overview. Now we would like to move to our presentations, really from the ground, the indigenous women's taking leadership in Thailand and in the Philippines. So to continue our sharing from the ground, I would like to invite Ms. Noreri. She's a chief of a Huyekang village. She belongs to the current indigenous group in Thailand. She's also one of the prominent indigenous women leaders in Thailand. She's actively engaging on women's issues, promotion of indigenous knowledge, and sustainable natural resource management and local and country levels. Pinoreri, please go ahead with your presentation.
Presentation ไม่มาค่ะผมมือเฉเปอร์นะคะสวัสดีค่ะสวัสดียินดีต้อนรับนะคะผู้เข้าร่วมนะคะที่มาฟังห้องนี้นะคะ
Good morning, everyone, all the participants online and also who are present here.
ค่ะวันนี้นะคะเสียงจากผู้หญิงชนเผ่าพื้นเมืองนะคะที่เป็นผู้หญิงที่อยู่ในชุมชนนะคะที่อยู่ในพื้นที่
So I'm bringing the voice of indigenous women who are really at the ground to take action.
ผู้หญิงเหล่านี้นะคะก็สามารถสร้างการเปลี่ยนแปลงนะคะให้กับชุมชนให้กับตัวเองแล้วก็ให้กับโลกได้ด้วยมือของพวกเขานะคะด้วยมือของแม่
We are the agent of change with our two hands that making change in our own community and also to the world with our two hands of the mother.
ค่ะถัดไปนะคะ
Next, please.
ค่ะเราผู้หญิงนะคะที่อยู่ในชุมชนนะคะเราเชื่อมั่นนะคะว่าป่าคือชีวิตของพวกเรานะคะได้จากป่าได้จากทรัพยากรได้จากธรรมชาติและสิ่งแวดล้อมเรามีทั้งดูแลอนุรักษ์แล้วก็ได้มาแล้วก็ใช้ประโยชน์นะคะโดยเฉพาะทรัพยากรธรรมชาตินะคะให้สมุนไพรให้อาหารให้ความรู้แล้วก็เราก็ใช้องค์ความรู้ของเราในการฟื้นฟูแล้วก็อนุรักษ์แล้วก็ดูแลเขาด้วย
For us, forest is our life, and we respect each other because the forest provides source of good health, food security, and also related to our identity, our spiritual
And that also provide the learning space. So we not only know how to use it sustainably, but we also doing to conserve and also restore these natural resources. Next.
ค่ะก็จะยกตัวอย่างของพื้นที่ชุมชนที่ตัวเองอยู่นะคะเป็นชุมชนของปักเกยอนะคะเป็นผู้ชนเผ่าพื้นเมืองนะคะที่นั่นนะคะแต่ถ้าเป็นภาพรวมของประเทศไทยนะคะชนเผ่าพื้นเมืองเนี่ยมีเยอะแต่ว่าวันนี้จะยกตัวอย่างในกรณีของบ้านห้วยอีข้างนะคะห้วยอีข้างเนี่ยเรามีพื้นที่อยู่10,000 ไร่นะคะที่เราจะต้องดูแลการดูแลเหล่านี้เนี่ยเราก็จำแนกป่าแล้วก็เราก็แบ่งพื้นที่ป่าโดยใช้องค์ความรู้ทั้งคนรุ่นเก่าแล้วก็คนรุ่นใหม่เนี่ยมาทำให้เป็นเครื่องมือนะคะเพื่อใช้แผนที่หรือว่าการจำแนกแผนที่เนี่ยเราก็มีอยู่5-6ในการจำแนกนะคะโดยมีอยู่1เนี่ยเป็นพื้นที่ทำกินนะคะ2เนี่ยที่อยู่อาศัย3เนี่ยเป็นพื้นที่สวนแล้วก็พื้นที่ไร่หมุนเวียนนะคะที่อยู่ในนั้นแล้วก็4เป็นพื้นที่ป่าใช้สอยป่าที่เรามาใช้ที่อยู่อาศัยในการสร้างบ้านนะคะ5เนี่ยเป็นพื้นที่อนุรักษ์ซึ่งเหล่านี้เนี่ยค่ะที่เราจำแนกนะคะ60% นะคะเป็นพื้นที่ป่าอนุรักษ์ที่อยู่บนฐานความเชื่อแล้วก็การใช้จิตวิญญาณสิ่งเหนือธรรมชาติของชนเผ่าในการอนุรักษ์
I'm come from Hoi Ikang and where we are collectively managed around 10,000 rai or equal to 1,600 hectares. And the management based on our traditional knowledge as well as the modern science where we are so using the community mapping to manage this. Both men and women equally that respond for this. And basically we divide in the 4 types of the area that we are based on our use now: residential area, farm and garden area, forest that where we can use and utilize. And the last one is the protected area where the people will not touch it, and that will based on our belief and our traditional custom and our traditional governance system. With 60% is the protected area. Next.
ค่ะอันนี้ก็พูดถึงป่าความเชื่อนะคะที่อยู่ในชุมชนปากเกยอนะคะโดยเฉพาะคนที่เกิดใหม่ที่เขาจะให้ความสำคัญกับป่าเขาจะใช้ความเชื่อของเขาโดยเฉพาะรกเนาะที่คนที่เกิดใหม่เนี่ยใส่ในกระบอกไม้ไผ่แล้วก็ไปผูกกับต้นไม้ต้นนั้นน่ะก็เรียกว่าต้นเดปอต้นเดปอเนี่ยมาเป็นต้นจิตวิญญาณของคนนั้นนะคะไม่สามารถที่จะไปตัดของเขาอันเนี้ยก็คือการอนุรักษ์ผ่าความเชื่อที่ปากเกยอเขาถ่ายทอดแล้วก็สืบทอดกันมาอย่างยาวนาน
I would like to share you our way of conservation based on our beliefs. So the new baby born, after they cut the umbilical cord, the father will put the umbilical cord into the bamboo and tie with the healthy tree. And sometimes it can bear fruit, so that ensure that those trees not only take care of the human but also the animal in the forest. So the spirit of the baby is inside the tree. So no one allowed to cut this this tree, because it's been like you are killing that person and also the soul of that person. These really show the deep relationship of the human and nature and the supernatural that helping our forest until remain until now.
นอกจากป่าต้นเดปอนะคะยังมีหลายอย่างนะคะที่ปากเกยอเนี่ยมันมีความเชื่อเรื่องป่าโดยเฉพาะมันมีในตำนานหรือว่าการถ่ายทอดโดยผ่านความเชื่อแล้วก็นิทานด้วยเนาะไม่ให้ใช้ป่าจุดนี้เนี่ยมีเยอะแยะมากมายนะคะในพื้นที่ของป่าของเราปากเกยอเรียกว่าป่าความเชื่อเนาะทีนี้เนี่ยทำไมเขาอยู่ได้มายาวนานนะคะ500-600 ปีนะคะแต่ว่าป่าที่เราอยู่เนี่ยก็ยังมีเหมือนเดิมเพียงแต่ว่าเราประชากรเพิ่มขึ้นเนี่ยก็ทำทางกินเนี่ยอาจจะกระจายมากขึ้นแต่ว่าป่าที่เรามีความเชื่อเนี่ยอย่าใช้เหมือนเดิมนะคะ
We also have other practice of like the sacred area where the people like believe like you're not allowed to do some activity or to touch or to pollute those areas because it's like taboo. So that traditional information, knowledge passed down to generation to taking care of our natural resources. It's more than 500 or 600 years. The forest still remain, even though the number of population increase. So this is how we really manage and maintain by our own system. No? Next one, please.
ค่ะอันนี้ก็จากที่เราจำแนกป่าความเชื่อมาหลายๆความเชื่อเราก็มีป่าที่อยู่ในมาเป็นป่าที่อยู่ในนานอยู่แล้วแล้วก็คือป่าผู้หญิงป่าเกินเรียกว่าเกินเนื้อมือเนี่ยเป็นพื้นที่ของผู้หญิงสำหรับในการหล่อเลี้ยงครอบครัวของเขาในการหาอาหารในการสร้างเศรษฐกิจด้วยในป่าผู้หญิงนะคะแล้วก็มีทั้งสมุนไพรอาหารเมล็ดพันธุ์ตามฤดูกาลของเขาแต่ละฤดูนะคะ
Based on our category of traditional belief, we divide the forest into types. No, there are Gönömö and Gönöpa. Gönömö is represented as a women forest. So that forest is kind of the source of the food and income of the family. So the Hoi Kang village have initiated this, like try to revive the indigenous women's forest to helping in respond to the health and well-being of the community, learning space and generate income generation.
แล้วก็ผู้หญิงเองเขาก็เชื่อว่าในป่าผู้หญิงป่าเกินเนื้อมืออนาคตจะเป็นพื้นที่เศรษฐกิจให้กับพวกเขาในการสร้างอาชีพในยุคของโควิดแล้วก็ในยุคของเศรษฐกิจที่มันไม่ค่อยดีนักนะคะ
Yeah, and our women group also believe that this forest can provide us the better economic, no, because this can provide the future income because they have planted diverse type of tree and plants. We can generate the income even though in the time of hardship like COVID like that. Next one, please.
ค่ะ จากที่เรามีการใช้เราก็มีการอนุรักษ์นะคะจัดห้วยข้างเนี่ยเรามี1 ปีเนี่ยเราก็มีกิจกรรมนะคะในป่ามากมายนะคะโดยพลังของชุมชนเองโดยชุมชนลุกขึ้นมาจากการตัวเองนะคะโดยเฉพาะแผนที่ทำอยู่เนี่ยนะคะจากแรกเนี่ยเป็นผลงานของเยาวชนนะคะในการทำแผนที่ทำมือนะคะแล้วก็ต่อมาเราก็ทำให้ในชุมชนนะคะมีเครื่องมือมีเอกสารเราก็ส่งไปที่อบต.เพื่อที่อบต.เนี่ยทำให้มาเป็นรูปร่างขึ้นนะคะทีนี้เนี่ยจากที่ตลอดปีน่ะเราก็มีการทำเราไม่ได้รับการสนับสนุนนะคะเราก็เลยทำคิดว่าแต่ละปีน่ะมีทั้งไฟล์มีทั้งการเปลี่ยนแปลงอะไรต่างๆเนี่ยชุมชนเองเราก็คุยกันนะคะโดยเฉพาะบทบาทผู้หญิงนะคะมีการคุยกันได้สูงมากเลยต้องเก็บภาษีนะคะให้ชุมชนนะคะคนละ38 บาทต่อคนนะคะจากประชากรนะคะประชากร500 กว่าคนเราก็หาด้วยพื้นที่ป่าที่เราดูแลอยู่10,000 ไร่ต้องตกคนละ38 บาททุกคนจะต้องจ่าย38 บาทเพื่อที่จะปกป้องดูแลป่าแล้วก็ดูแลพื้นที่น้ำด้วยของเรานะคะโดยชุมชนนะคะสร้างขึ้นมาด้วยตัวเขาเอง
Apart from using, we also taking care of these natural resources. The young generation are the one who helping us with the community mapping. First, it was made like manually, but then later on they are using GPS. No, so all the people come and work together. And actually, women itself they also using the GPS to do the community mapping together with the men. And they're also doing fire break now every year. And from this kind and also monitoring. So from this kind of work, they also come up with the initiative. Now among the women, they discuss, we have to do this every year and we don't really have the financial support. So what do we do? So they come up with the idea to collect the tax from everyone in the community members, divide by the 10 right of the area. So it costs around 38 baht per person per year. And thus money using for taking care of this forest and also the water area. Next, please.
ค่ะอันนี้ก็เป็นมือของแม่นะคะมือของแม่ที่สร้างอาหารสร้างความมั่นคงทางอาหารสร้างความมั่นคงทางเมล็ดพันธุ์เพราะว่าเราอยู่ในยุคสถานการณ์ที่มีการเปลี่ยนแปลงนะคะโดยเฉพาะการเปลี่ยนแปลงสภาพภูมิอากาศผู้หญิงเรานะคะได้แม้จะไม่ใช้องค์ความรู้ที่อยู่ในห้องเรียนนะคะวิทยาศาสตร์เนาะเพราะว่าเราไม่มีความรู้เหล่านี้แต่ว่าเรามีความรู้ในพื้นที่ของตัวเองนะคะโดยเฉพาะการเก็บรักษาเมล็ดพันธุ์การรักษาเมล็ดพันธุ์แล้วก็การสร้างความมั่นคงในอาหารเพราะว่าสิ่งเหล่านี้เนี่ยมาเป็นความรู้ที่เราโสดทอดหรือว่าสืบทอดมาจากรุ่นสู่รุ่นนะคะเมล็ดพันธุ์พื้นที่เมล็ดพันธุ์ด้านเดิมเหล่านี้เนี่ยมาสามารถบอกได้เลยว่าการเปลี่ยนแปลงน่ะมาสามารถอยู่ได้แต่ว่าถ้าเราไปซื้อเมล็ดพันธุ์จากในตัวเมืองหรือว่าตัวร้านเนี่ยไม่สามารถจะปลูกได้ในพื้นที่ของเราอันนี้นี่เป็นอีกตัวหนึ่งที่องค์ความรู้เหล่านี้เนี่ยได้สืบทอดกันมาแล้วก็สองเนี่ยเป็นตัวหนึ่งที่ไม่ทนต่อโรคเมล็ดพันธุ์ที่อยู่ในราคาเนี่ยมันไม่ทนต่อโรคเพราะว่าเราใช้เมล็ดพันธุ์เหล่านี้เนี่ยมาเป็นเมล็ดพันธุ์ที่มาสามารถเก็บเองได้แล้วก็แบ่งปันแล้วก็ปลูกต่อเป็นการถ่ายทอดต่อไปนะคะ
Not every woman access to education. So scientists or the knowledge from the classroom may not applicable to all, but we have the knowledge of our mother that passed out to our generation to generation. And this picture represents the hand of the mother who are feeding the family and also ensure the health and well-being for the family. The women have holding the traditional knowledge on the food very much. We kept a lot of diverse of the seed that resilient to the climate. So we do not buy the seed from the outside or from the corporate, but because that's one, it costs the money. Secondly, you don't have the right to determine what kind of food you can eat. So the food sovereignty is there when we are the owner of the seed. And the seed that you buy from the outside is really prone to the diseases. So our native seed is really the key future for our food security. It's not only for our community, but also for the world. So protecting these seeds, women are playing the crucial role, and the knowledge has to be really crucial to everyone, and we aim to pass down this knowledge to our generation.
เมล็ดพันธุ์เหล่านี้เนี่ยมาจากที่ไหนคือมาจากไร่หมุนเวียนเนาะปักเกยอเนี่ยเขาทำไร่หมุนเวียนผู้หญิงเนี่ยมีบทบาทสำคัญมากในไร่หมุนเวียนเมล็ดพันธุ์เหล่านี้เนี่ยสามารถตอบโจทย์ได้ในสถานการณ์โควิดเพราะว่าในสถานการณ์โควิดเนี่ยมีหลายที่ถ้าไปดูหรือว่าไปเห็นในสื่ออะไรต่างๆเนี่ยจะสามารถบอกได้เลยว่ามีการฆ่าตัวตายเกิดขึ้นแล้วก็มีการไม่ได้กินอาหารเกิดขึ้นทำให้พวกเราที่อยู่ในชุมชนท้องถิ่นนะคะโดยเฉพาะคนที่ประกอบไร่หมุนเวียนนะคะเราสามารถไปแบ่งปันอาหารให้กับคนที่อยู่ในตัวเมืองด้วยแล้วก็ห้วยอีกข้างนะคะก็เป็นชุมชนหนึ่งที่มีการแบ่งปันอาหารสูงมากเพราะว่าเราจะมีเมล็ดพันธุ์เราจะมีไร่หมุนเวียนเราจะมีข้าว
This variety of seeds, it comes from the rotational farming or shifting cultivation, where it was discriminated and is to see as the bad practice. But actually from this kind of farming practices, we able to secure the food. Even during the COVID time, you may heard people commit suicide or people don't have food to eat. But in our village, we have food security, and we even able to share this food to the people in the city from this our rotational farming. Okay. Next, please. อันสุดท้ายแล้วพี่ค่ะ
ค่ะสุดท้ายนะคะเราผู้หญิงชนเผ่าพื้นเมืองนะคะเราจะต้องมีการปรับตัวเราจะต้องอยู่กับองค์ความรู้ของตัวเองด้วยแล้วก็เราจะต้องอยู่กับสิ่งที่เข้ามาใหม่ๆด้วยเราไม่สามารถจะปฏิเสธได้ว่าสิ่งที่เข้ามาใหม่เนี่ยจะต้องอยู่กับเรายังไงเราไม่สามารถที่จะปิดกั้นองค์ความรู้ของเราได้ด้วยว่าสิ่งเหล่านี้เนี่ยเราจะต้องโซ่ต่อยังไงให้เด็กแล้วก็คนในสังคมเนี่ยยอมรับในองค์ความรู้ของตัวเองซึ่งสำคัญมากค่ะองค์ความรู้เหล่านี้เนี่ยมันจะต้องมีที่ดินที่มากคนนะคะเพื่อที่จะให้พวกเขาอยู่ได้ในท่ามกลางการเปลี่ยนแปลง โลกแล้วก็การเปลี่ยนแปลงสภาพภูมิอากาศค่ะ
So the world is keep changing, and we also have to be resilient. And our knowledge is very important for our people. So the women is very important to play the role of this one. But this knowledge cannot be passed down or to be continued if there is no recognition of the land rights. So to allow us recognize the rights to the land is very crucial to continue our these practices and to contribute to the climate change and the global framework of the biodiversity. Put the women in the center. Thank you.
ขอบคุณค่ะ
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pinoreri, for that very powerful sharing from the Hui Ekang village. And now we only have 20 minutes left, so we'll straight go into the next sharing from the Philippines. And I would like to invite Ms. Conjita, who is currently the president of Kegat, a startup women-led agri-cooperative. She was appointed as NCIP commissioner from 2010 to 2013. She has been doing advocacy work for the past 25 years to fight for the rights of ancestral domain, environmental protection, and welfare of indigenous peoples, and also leading marches on the construction of, against the construction of mega dam projects. Conchita, you have the floor.
Nanay Conching, pwede na po tayong magsimula. Nakamute po kayo, Nanay Conching.
Oo nga, di ko mabuksan.
Okay po.
Hello. Magandang araw po. Ako po si Conchita Calzado, katutubong Dumagat Remontado. Ako po ang Pangulo ng Kababaihang Dumagat Agricultural Cooperative o Kagat. Ang miyembro nito ay matatagpuan sa 3 probinsya ng Quezon, Rizal at ng Bulacan dito sa Luzon.
Good morning, everyone. I am Conchita Calzado, an Indigenous Dumagat Remontado IP tribe member. I am the president of the Dumagat Women Agricultural Cooperative or KIGAT. Our members can be found in 3 provinces, in Quezon, Rizal, and Bulacan, in the Luzon Islands.
Sa Region 3 and Region 4A, at may mga regular na meeting ito upang matiyak na ang layunin ng kababaihan na maging katuwang ng aming kalalakihan sa mga gawain ay naiisa katuparan. Na ang plano ng kagat na magkaroon ang pangangalaga sa kalikasan at ang kulturang nakaugat sa aming lupaing ninuno. Ang aming pagkatao ay hindi, sapagkat ito ay aming pagkatao, hindi kami maaaring sabihin katutubo kung nasa labas kami ng aming lupain at malayo sa kalikasan na siyang kinasanayan. Kung kaya ganun na lang, kung kaya ganun na lang ang aming pagpapahalaga at pagpuprotekta at pagnanais na mapangalagaan ng kagubatan.
We conduct regular meetings to ensure that the goals of the women IP members are in line and complementary to the goals of the men members of our IP tribe, specifically on our desire to protect the environment and to protect our culture that is rooted to our ancestral land. We believe that as Indigenous people, we cannot be separated from our ancestral land and environment because it forms part of our identity. We cannot be called Indigenous people if we are outside our indigenous land and if we are far from our environment, which we are born into. This is why we have this burning desire to protect our land, especially the forest.
Slide,
scroll up, please. Up.
Ang mga pangunahing proyekto ng kababaihan ay ang pagtatanim ng mga root crops, mga handicrafts, habang ang kalalakihan naman ay nagtatanim ng pangmatagalan, gaya ng niyog, saging, kakao, pa. Tinutulungan kami ng pakisama na mailuwas sa pamilihan ang mga produkto sa mas mahal na presyo kumpara sa mga lokal na mamimili.
Our main projects, specifically for women members, is the planting of vegetables, root crops, creation of handicrafts. While our men members are in charge of planting long-term crops such as coconut, banana, cacao, and others. We are being assisted by Pakisama, which is a national confederation of small-scale fishers and farmers organizations, to look for outside markets where we can sell our produce at a premium price.
Sinisigurado namin na ang mga tradisyonal na pamamaraan ng pagsasaka ay hindi malawakan. Pagkatapos ng harvest ng mga halaman, pakibaba. Sinisigurado namin na ang mga tradisyonal pamaraan ay hindi malawakan pagkatapos ng harvest. At pinanunumbalik namin ang gubat. Ang pagkuha rin ng yamang gubat ay may limitasyon. Hindi kami kumukuha ng labis sa aming kailangan. Gaya ng pulot at almasiga. May pamamaraan kami upang hindi mamatay ang mga puno sa pagkuha ng dagta nito. Samantala, hindi namin kinukuha ang mga batang puno pa rin ng ratan.
Our traditional practices in farming and forest gathering are only done in a sustainable manner. After the harvest, we replant the seeds from the harvest, and we let the area be reforested to enable the soil to be reinvigorated or revitalized again. There's also a limitation on the products that are being gathered from the forest. We only get what we need. An example of this is the harvesting of honey and almasiga resin. We have a way of getting or collecting the resin without killing the trees in the process of collecting the resin. Also, we do not harvest young rattan.
Ganon din ang NTFP na umalalay sa mga community enterprise na kung ano ang mga produktong mayroon kaming maaring pagkakitaan, gaya ng lot at almasiga. Medyo nahirapan kami sa simula, ngunit ngayon ay nasasanay na rin na pahalagahan ang mga proyekto dahil na rin sa mabilis at malaki ang pagbabago na ng panahon.
In addition, NTFP is helping us in our community enterprise to identify products that we can also derive income from, such as honey and almasiga. At the start, we experienced some difficulties, but eventually we learned to adapt to the project because we saw that there is a need for us to do so because of the changing climate as well. Down, please. Next.
Pakitaas na lang.
Okay.
Naging active, bukod pa dito, ang pulisiya ng gobyerno ay hindi makatotohanang ipinatutupad gaya ng proseso ng pre-prior informed consent na sinasabi ng IPRA law. Sa halip kung ano ang priority nila ay sa pilitang pinatutupad kahit makakasira ng kalikasan, gaya ng paliwadam, pagmimina sa iba't ibang lugar ng bansa, at mga tourism project na ang target pa ay ang aming mga sagradong lugar na nasa loob ng aming lupaing ninuno.
However, there are government policies that are not being implemented properly, such as the process of the free prior informed consent that is one of the provisions of the IPRA law or the Indigenous Peoples Rights Act in the Philippines. Instead, they prioritize projects that are actually destructive to the environment, such as the Kaliwa Dam project in Quezon and Tanay, mining projects in different areas of the country, and tourism projects that target sacred lands of the indigenous people.
Naging aktibo rin ang kababaihang dumagat sa mga dialogue sa mga local officials, mga ahensya ng gobyerno at mga pribadong kumpanya upang igiit ang aming karapatan at naayon sa batas. Umaasa sana kami nakikilalanin ang aming Ancestral Domain Sustainable and Protection Plan na pinagkasunduan ng aming mga komunidad. Sumunod sa guidelines ng NCIP, National Commission on Indigenous People, kung paano ito buuin, na paulit-ulit binalidate sa mga komunidad at nagsasabi kung paano naming gusto paunlarin at pangalagaan ang aming lupaing ninuno at kalikasan.
The women of the Dumagat tribe has been very active in dialogues with the local officials, the government agencies, and even the private companies in order to raise and highlight their rights according to law. They hope that they will recognize our rights to ancestral domain, to their ancestral domain, specifically the Ancestral Domain Sustainable Protection Plan that the indigenous people have developed and agreed upon with their community members. This Ancestral Domain Sustainable Protection Plan has been developed under the guidelines of the National Commission of Indigenous Peoples, or NCIP, and has been repeatedly validated within the community. This document enumerates the different strategies that the IPs will undertake in order to develop as well as protect their ancestral lands and the environment. Down, please.
Kaya lang nananatili ito hanggang ngayon na hindi kinikilala ng NCIP mismo at lalo na ng aming lokal na pamahalaan, partikular dito sa Luzon Province at General Nakar. Ganon din sa Tarlac at iba pang mga lugar. Nataliwas sa Forest Land Use Plan na hanggang kasalukuyan hindi kinikilala ang aming ADS-DPP. Hindi pa harmonize ang ADS-DPP sa Forest Land Use Plan, ganon din ang LGU na ayaw kilalanin ang aming lupaing ninuno.
Yes, even though the Ancestral Domain Sustainable and Protection Plan has been developed under the guidelines of the NCIP, the NCIP themselves do not recognize that still, as well as the local government units in the different provinces in Luzon, such as in General Nakar and Tarlac. It is also not integrated yet in the Forest Land Use Plan, or FLUP. And in this case, the LGU does not recognize still the rights to ancestral domain of the indigenous people. Down, please.
Isang malaking hamon din sa kababaihan ang pag-aayos ng aming indigenous political structure na nagiging dahilan ng aming pagkakahati-hati at pagkalito ng mga komunidad kung sino ang mga tamang leader ng aming tribo. Sa sitwasyong ito, wala man sa aming tradisyon ang makialam sa politika, ay nakikialam na rin kami, gaya ngayong darating na national election. Pumili na kasi kami ng aming leader na aming susuportahan mula Pangulo hanggang munisipyo o mga mayor na tunay na maglilingkod at kikilala sa aming mga lehitimong karapatan.
One of the major challenges of women IP members is the indigenous political structure of their group that causes division among its members and also confusion on who should be the right leader of their group. In this case, even if it's not in the tradition of the group for women to be engaged in the governance or engage in the decision making, they still assert their right because they think that it is important for their voices to be heard. They have already selected who they think should be the right leader from the president, the position of president, until the position of the local chief executive at the municipal level, who they believe will best serve the interests and the rights of the indigenous peoples in their area. Down, please.
Sige pa.
Next paragraph. Ayan.
Mensahe ko sa lahat ng nakikinig na sana ay maging seryoso tayong lahat sa pagprotekta sa kalikasan. Naranasan na natin at namin ang malala ng pagbabago ng panahon. Ang mga dating hindi binabaha, ngayon ay binabaha na. Ang mga lugar na hindi naaabot ng alon ng dagat, ngayon ay naaabot na. Nahihirapan na kaming umani ng tanim. Umuunti na ang mga bunga o laman ng mga root crops. sana ay mapangalagaan natin ang kinabukasan ng ating saling lahi. Maraming salamat.
Yes, thank you, Nanay Conching. My message to everyone that is listening today is that we hope that everyone will be serious about protecting the environment. We are already experiencing the drastic change in the weather. The areas that used to not be flooded are starting to be flooded now. The areas that used to be protected from the tides of the sea are now being devastated by it. We are facing difficulties in the crops and the root crops that we are harvesting. There are not that much root crops or crops that we can harvest now. We hope that we continue to protect our environment for the future of our generation. Thank you very much. Please play the video showing the community of KGAT. Thank you.
Dajjal, are we screening the video? Thank you very much, Conjita, for sharing the story from your community and the leadership that Indigenous women, together with men, are taking in your communities. So, dear participants, we are now at the end of our sharing, and I'm really, really sorry that we don't have time to entertain any questions and answer because our time has finished. But we'd just like to reiterate that as part of the Community Speak agenda that AIPP, NTFP-EP, and AFA are continuing to promote and also make it more visible in the World Forestry Congress. We'll continue to do so by putting human rights-based approach in the climate and biodiversity work that we'll be doing, and also really trying to bring the community faces and stories in all the work that we do at different levels in the future. So with this, I would like to thank all the speakers, the participants, the interpreters, Mylene and Pirawan, and also Dazzle and Robin for all the technical support that you have provided. And if you have any questions to any of our speakers, please do write to us. We'll try to share your questions to them and try to get answers to that. But before we end, can I request all the participants who are in the room to collect the t-shirts that we have as part of the Community Speak agenda that we have been trying to promote in the region? And also request all the online speakers to turn on the camera. We can have a group photo before we close the session.